Mr. Olumide Adefioyi. He is a social and behavior change specialist from the Momentum Safe Surgery in Family Planning and Obstetrics. Thank you also for joining us on the program.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right, let's start with you, Mayua. 16 days of activism. Why do we have to keep aside this 16 days every year to draw attention to the issue of actions do we need to take in order to have a behavior change, particularly from those who have received the most of accusing fingers as perpetrators of some of these dastardly acts?
Okay, thank you. So I want to draw us back to the theme for this year, which is Unite. Invest to prevent violence against women and girls. So the theme is actually giving us the power. It's showing us that, yes, as each of us, as individuals, as groups, as communities, we are key stakeholders regarding this issue of gender-based violence. So one, we need to recognize the fact that we are stakeholders and we need to do something. The second is that, as you rightly alluded, so it's a behavior thing that is deeply rooted in social norms, and so that also makes it addressing it a very complex, somehow complex, because again, there is no one strategy or intervention that will address the issue of gender-based violence, because these are things. So, for example, I was reading a report recently that said I think around 65% or thereabouts would believe that gender-based violence against women and girls is acceptable. So if people believe, if that large proportion of the population where the study was conducted believe that gender-based violence is acceptable,
it's normal.
Yes, it's normal. So then we have a problem in our hands. And again, because people have been exposed over time to acts of violence against women, they tend to normalize it. So I bring us back to the question you asked. So first is, each of us need to recognize the fact that we are this is a problem, one. Then two, that we are stakeholders that need to intervene, that need to take specific actions, whether you are a businesswoman, whether you're a community leader, whether you are a household head, or whatever you are, you are also a stakeholder in this intervention, or in these approaches to end gender-based violence in Nigeria. Now, as Mayday already stated, if a large proportion of the population is affected by gender-based violence, then how can we progress as a nation? So we have to all recognize it that we are stakeholders in this fight against gender-based violence. And looking at the theme, it says unite. So we can, presently there are pockets of, well, I wouldn't call it pockets. So there are various interventions, various activities going on around each part of the country against gender-based violence. But we need a more coordinated approach, and that is when each of us first realizes that we are stakeholders in this fight, and it is not a woman thing. It is not a girl's thing. It is our thing. So we need to we need to recognize that, and then that can spur every one of us as stakeholders to say, yes, we are taking this action, and then being specific about the action. So again, it is not something general. It is not something that is even far-fetched. You may even be a household head, maybe a man, a head of a household, and somebody under you, children under you, or the child under you, the female child under you, might even have been experiencing gender-based violence in the school or in places where you never thought. So we need to recognize that we are stakeholders too, that this is something that we need to all address together.
Okay. I come to you, Mayua. Apart from the physical assault on women and girls, one aspect that is seldom talked about, that is hardly even discussed, is deprivation of opportunities based on gender, where easily families can avail opportunity to a boy, a male child in the family, and then look at the girl child and say, you are a girl. You know, how worrisome is this trend? Because it just seems to be, to me, like over the years we keep emphasizing, we keep talking about this, but the trend keeps, you know, going on. He mentioned something about being culturally, religiously rooted, and this makes it a little bit more complex. If you agree also that this trend is worrisome, are we changing approaches? Are we changing the method of engaging with especially the institutions that are responsible for this perpetuation of this deprivation?
Okay, that's a very good point you've made, because the truth is, violence is not just about the physical violence, and I know it's important to talk about that because at least almost one in three women have experienced physical and or sexual violence from their intimate partner or non-intimate partner at least once in their lives, or even both. You know, but most women have experienced this, you know, the physical aspect of violence. But one understated aspect is the one you mentioned around deprivation and what we like to call abuse, where you are disadvantaged or underserved, or you are pushed aside, and that makes you vulnerable because of your gender. And that is one of the things we also try to address during the 16 days of activism. But Olumide mentioned some very important things that I feel like if we begin to take those things on, it will help a lot. Number one is, first of all, we have to take a stand, right? Everybody has to recognize the issue here. Like, okay, because you are a certain gender does not mean you are not a human being and you do not have human rights. We all are born with human rights. I think that's the first thing that everybody needs to be able to understand. You ought to also be able to recognize when the vulnerabilities of certain groups, right? Everybody's vulnerability is not the same, and especially as a woman, there are some intersections of vulnerability, both in the workplace, at school, even online. I mean, we have online communities now where women are abused or marginalized or bullied in workplaces, in their homes, in societies, and a lot of this is rooted in social norms that need transformation. So we first of all need to begin to recognize the issues, name them appropriately, identify them appropriately, and begin to change them. They are rooted in a lot of social norms that need transformation, which is why we talk about gender transformative programming. Whatever programming you're doing, there need to be reasonable accommodations made for the vulnerable section of that population, where in this case we're talking about women. In cases of education, in cases of economic opportunity, in cases of empowerment, in cases, I mean, there are so many cases where women and girls are vulnerable or underserved or marginalized or even abused as a result of their gender. So the 16 days of activism is, just like Olumide said, calling all stakeholders. And the truth is, we're all stakeholders, right? Everyone. We're all stakeholders one way or the other, in as much as we're a part of the society, we're a part of the world today. And that is why the theme is about uniting, you know, making yourself an ally, right? Liaising with local organizations that support human rights efforts. Do you understand? Taking it up personally and, you know, as an ally, taking a stand and speaking up about it in situations where you see these abuses or these marginalizations happening. We encourage people to speak. They do it to mostly their family and friends. So where you see people around you, where you see your family, your friends, where you see vulnerable people around you being marginalized or underserved or being abused, it is encouraged that you speak up. Also, we are calling stakeholders at the level of government and policy to begin to enforce. There are policies in place already. Let's not mistake that. But how much are people aware of these policies? You know, how are they being enforced? You know, the enforcement bodies, are they even aware of, you know, the extent to which they can enforce some of these policies? And it's not as good as we'd like. So this 16 days of activism is also advocating for organizations and institutions at that level to begin to increase the awareness and enforcement of some of these policies that can prevent these issues.
I'm very grateful that you brought in the law enforcement agencies, because they are very critical in getting us to where we want to be at. And I still go back to the issue of the differences in the way even the law enforcement agencies approach these issues. For example, if I physically assault a woman, the chances that even a police passing by will arrest me is higher than when the girl goes to the police officer and say, my father didn't put me in school, for example, because to the police officer, this is your business. But physical assault is treated, with some level of seriousness than. And for me, this is the silent killer, as I call it.
Absolutely.
When we have normalized that vision, that view that the girl child or the woman deserves this treatment simply because of nothing else other than she's a woman. That she's a woman. So, but the question I want to ask you, Olumide, is this: how much role does economic power play in the subjugation of women and girls and the girl? And I explained this question with an example. We know that girls from families that are well-to-do, for example, have some level of advantage than girls that are from families that are not well-to-do. Because of economic power relations, families are willing to, for example, send their children to go and do house help and all of those things. Because if it all comes back to what? Economic power. Now, how much is let me put it very openly, how much role is poverty playing in helping to continue the perpetuation of this subjugation of women, and especially the girl child?
Okay, thank you. So it's the contribution of poverty and lack of access to economic resources is really contributing so much to the perpetration of gender-based violence, and also to let us know, just as Meiwa said, that there is economic violence as a part of, as a component or as a type of gender-based violence. So deprivation or denying someone access to economic resources or opportunities because of the person's gender is also part of gender-based violence. And so over time in our society, people have realized that. So you even have women who are in abusive marriages, toxic relationships, that don't want to leave because they are thinking of where would they start from, because
my children.
Yes, where would they start from? How would they take care of the child? Because they are not yet economically empowered. Yes, so it presents a very serious problem, and that is why I mentioned earlier that there is no single strategy that would help us to end violence against women or prevent it. It has to be a multi-pronged approach. So an approach is addressing social norms that perpetrate gender-based violence. Another approach is addressing the issue of economic empowerment. And when we talk about economic empowerment for women, so that they are empowered in terms of resources, in terms of finances, to be able to live an improved quality of life. We also, so again, such programs or interventions too cannot just exist alone, because we've had we've had cases of where women are empowered with maybe equipment to boost their work, motorcycles, grinding machines and all that, even cash. And when they get back, it is the men that collect it from them.
Definitely. So they even toil, because I've been part of a project where grinding machines, as you mentioned, were given to about 60 women in Abuja. Then 2 years later, we went back to do an assessment. And what we realized mostly was that women, the husbands, immediately realized that these women have gotten these machines and they are now making some money. Most of the spouses, that's the husbands now, they stayed off you know, some of the basic provisions that they used to even give before. And then they now added to the burden of the woman. So the woman now becomes responsible for school fees. She became responsible for feeding the family and all of that.
Yeah, so we need to recognize that. We need to recognize that whatever strategy, whatever intervention that we are deploying to empower women as a means to prevent gender-based violence has to be a multi approach. Yes, that addresses that part of economic empowerment and also addresses the social norms or community norms that enable gender-based violence, and then also addresses the fact that gender-based people become aware, because some people just feel that they don't really see it as a form of violence. So for example, if a man has a wife and he says, no, you can't work, you can't have access, whatever you need, you have to, and then the woman, it's not like a voluntary consent. It's not with the voluntary consent or the informed. Something can even be voluntary and not informed.
Yes.
So it's not with the informed consent of the woman, and then she just agrees based on the present conditions or realities she's in, and then she's denied access to resources and all that. Sometimes too, the man may not realize that it is a form of violence, because a lot of emphasis is placed on physical violence, sexual violence, which is important. But then we also have to consider the other forms of violence, like this,
but more potent.
Yes, more potent, because again, those like this economic violence now, depriving women to economic resources, it would also eventually lead to physical violence, because the man may just decide that, oh, your demands are too much and all that, and or the woman may also want to react that, oh, I'm so much under pressure, there are a lot of things to take care of, and this money is not forthcoming, and you are not, I'm being deprived, and so it leads to, so it is it's an interplay of forces which we need to recognize, and then whatever like I said earlier, whatever interventions, whatever initiatives or programs or solutions that we are preferring. One is that we are not, when I say we now, so I'm trying to look at involving, because again, I mentioned something about everyone being a stakeholder. So it is not some people just sitting down somewhere and saying, oh, so this is how we are going to address this issue of gender-based violence. So are we also involving the concerned persons, the tag, I won't want to use the word targets, but the people that we feel would need those services, those economic empowerment, the women, for example, are we also involving them in the design, in the development of that intervention? If that is not being done, of course, that intervention will fail. So, for example, like the example I gave about women, and the one you gave about women being provided with grinding machine and all. So in the design of that intervention, were the men involved? Because if the men were involved and the women were involved in designing it, then right from the outset, the men will have been strategically engaged so that their mindset changes, that okay, this empowerment for your women will lead to them generating more income. But it doesn't now mean that what you have been doing before should stop. So we have to consider all that.
All right. I would have loved for this conversation to continue, but of course we are drawing closer home. But before we do that, I want to just give you a minute each to look into the camera and let the world hear your message, especially for these 16 days of activism. I start with you, Meiwa.
Okay, thank you. I think one thing that I want to say most importantly is for us to understand the interplay between poor and vulnerable. Not all poor people are vulnerable, and not all vulnerable people are poor. We have to recognize that some people, or most of the people around us, are vulnerable to one form or the other of violence or abuse. There's an intersection of different issues that make people vulnerable, and it is our jobs as allies to take a stand, to unite, to do all we can to prevent violence against women and girls in our society. They are an important section of our society that cannot afford to. We are an important section of the society that cannot afford to be left behind.
All right.
Thank you.
Olumide, your message?
Yeah, so I would say that we are all stakeholders in the effort to prevent gender-based violence and to end gender-based violence. We should realize that we are all affected. Even if you are a man, you would have a daughter, a wife. If you are not yet married, you have a sister, you have somebody who is a female that is connected to you. So we need to recognize that each of us need to take action in our own little ways and be advocates. So when we talk about preventing and ending gender-based violence, it is not something that it is not something we are doing in the secret. So let's people know each and every one of us as advocates. So we speak against, it is even starting from there, speaking against gender-based violence, taking a stand against gender-based violence. So we can use that as a starting point so that in our own little way, we are contributing to end that gender-based violence. And by the time there are those, each person is playing his or her part, by the time we aggregate all that together, we'll have made significant
and we will continue to make that significant move towards ending any form of violence against any human soul anywhere around the world, particularly in our communities in Nigeria. And I have to say a sincere thank you to you, Mayua Ede, Program Officer 2, Strategic Communications, Breakthrough Action Nigeria, Abuja. And she's also been talking alongside Olumide Adefioye, who is a social and behavior change specialist from the Momentum Safe Surgery in Family Planning and Obstetrics. And together, we've been talking, especially in the spirit of the 16 days of activism, which is geared towards drawing attention to the different forms of violence that women and girls suffer. And of course, this conversation will continue because it's a never-ending one. It's a very important one that we must continue to have. One important thing for me that has come up from this conversation is that we are all responsible. Don't look at us on TV as if it's our business. You watching us out there, it's your responsibility. Olumide just told you, you are either a brother, a father, an elder brother, or a son to some woman or a girl somewhere. So take responsibility, create that safer environment for women to thrive, because like Maywa told you, everyone has something to contribute towards the growth of our families, our communities, our states, and our country at large. And it's on this note that we draw the curtains on today's edition of our Soul Morning Show. My name is Usman Khatun Umar, urging you to keep a date with us again tomorrow, same time, same station, till we come your way again. Bye for now and enjoy the rest of the day.